This is my true story. I gave up everything to care for my paralyzed wife for 9 years after her accident, quit my job, and spent every single day bathing her, feeding her, lifting her wheelchair, sacrificing my entire life because I loved her. Then her doctor called me in alone and handed me a medical report that made my heart stop. The words said she could walk, that she'd been faking paralysis for 7 years. But that wasn't even the worst part of what I discovered. You won't believe what happened next. Before that, tell us where you're watching from, and please subscribe so more people hear this story. 9 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon, I got a phone call from the hospital that every spouse dreads. A nurse telling me my wife Sarah had been in a serious car accident and I needed to come immediately. Drove to the emergency room going 20 miles over the speed limit with my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. Terrified I was about to lose the woman I'd been married to for 16 years. Found her in the intensive care unit hooked up to machines with doctors surrounding her bed, her face bruised and swollen, her body broken in ways I couldn't fully comprehend yet. The neurologist pulled me aside after 3 hours of tests and scans, his face grave as he explained that Sarah had suffered severe spinal trauma in the collision that left her paralyzed from the waist down. Said the damage was permanent and irreversible, that she would never walk again, that our lives were about to change in ways we couldn't imagine. Watched him draw diagrams of her spine showing where the injury occurred, explaining terms like complete paralysis and loss of motor function that felt like hammers hitting my chest with every word. Stood next to her hospital bed that night after she woke up and watched her try to move her legs. Watched the panic in her eyes when nothing happened. Watched her break down sobbing when the reality hit her that she was paralyzed forever. Held her hand and made a promise right there that I would take care of her for the rest of our lives. That she would never face this alone. That our marriage vows of in sickness and in health meant something real, and I would prove it every single day. Made the decision within a week to quit my executive position at a marketing firm where I'd been working for 12 years, making $90,000 annually. Knew I couldn't be her caregiver and maintain a demanding career at the same time. My boss tried to convince me to take a leave of absence instead, said I was throwing away my career and my retirement. But I told him my wife needed me more than I needed a job. Walked away from everything I'd built professionally because I believed caring for my disabled wife was more important than any career or money or future plans. Spent 3 months learning how to be a full-time caregiver while Sarah went through rehabilitation that supposedly wasn't helping her regain any function below the waist. Learned how to properly transfer her from bed to wheelchair without injuring her or myself. Learned which medications she needed and when. Learned how to manage insurance paperwork and disability claims. The physical therapists taught me exercises I was supposed to help her do daily to prevent muscle atrophy. Showed me how to check for pressure sores and circulation problems. Transformed our entire house to accommodate her wheelchair. Spent thousands of dollars we didn't really have installing ramps and widening doorways and renovating the bathroom with special equipment. Moved our bedroom downstairs because she couldn't access the second floor anymore. Got rid of furniture to make space for her wheelchair to navigate. Our home stopped being a place where we lived together as husband and wife and became a medical facility where I worked as her full-time nurse and caregiver. Watched her sink into deep depression during those first months, completely understandable given what she'd lost. Tried everything to keep her spirits up while managing my own grief about our future. We'd been planning to travel after I retired, talking about buying a boat and sailing the coast, dreaming about grandchildren we'd watch grow up together. All of those dreams died in that car accident, and I mourned them while trying to stay strong for her. Never questioned whether the sacrifice was worth it because I loved her and believed she would do the same for me if our situations were reversed. Told myself every morning while lifting her out of bed that this was what real love looked like. That supporting your spouse through the worst thing that could happen was the whole point of marriage. Had no idea I was being manipulated from the very beginning. That the woman I was sacrificing everything for was lying to me about the most fundamental fact of her condition. Spent every single day for the next 9 years providing round-the-clock care for Sarah with a routine that never changed and never ended. waking up at 6 every morning to help her use the bathroom because she supposedly couldn't do it herself. Lifted her out of bed, carefully supporting her full weight, transferred her to the toilet, waited outside the door in case she needed help, then lifted her again to get her cleaned up and dressed for the day. My back started having serious problems within the first year from all the lifting, developed chronic pain that never went away, but I couldn't stop because she depended on me completely. Bathed her every morning after getting her dressed, had to support her entire body weight in the shower while washing her hair and skin, making sure she didn't slip or fall because one mistake could cause injuries she supposedly couldn't feel or protect herself from. The physical therapist had warned me about how fragile paralyzed patients were, how a small fall could break bones they wouldn't even know were broken until infection set in. Spent 45 minutes every single morning on this bathing routine, my arms aching and my back screaming, but telling myself this was love and devotion. Prepared every single meal she ate for 9 years because she claimed she couldn't reach the kitchen counters or appliances from her wheelchair, couldn't cook or even make herself a sandwich safely. Made her breakfast and brought it to wherever she was sitting, made her lunch and dinner, cut her food into small pieces, even though her hands worked fine because she said she got tired easily. Cleaned up after every meal and did all the dishes and grocery shopping and cooking, became a full-time chef on top of being a full-time nurse. Managed every single one of her medications with a complex schedule that required me to be available at specific times throughout the day and night, setting alarms on my phone so I wouldn't forget when she needed pain pills or muscle relaxers or the dozen other prescriptions her doctors kept adding. Drove her to medical appointments twice a week, lifted her in and out of the car each time, pushed her wheelchair through hospitals and clinics, sat through appointments taking notes about her care while she talked to doctors about symptoms and complications. Our bedroom became a medical facility with a hospital bed I'd purchased so I could adjust her position throughout the night, with rails to prevent her from falling, with special pressure-relieving mattress, because paralyzed patients supposedly develop bed sores easily. Kept medical supplies everywhere, adult diapers and catheters and wound care kits and emergency equipment. The room smelled like antiseptic and medical equipment instead of the lavender candles Sarah used to love before the accident. Watched all my friendships disappear over those 9 years because I never had time to see anyone or do anything outside of caring for Sarah. Friends stopped calling after I canceled plans repeatedly, stopped inviting me to gatherings because they knew I couldn't leave Sarah alone for more than an hour. My whole social life vanished, and I became completely isolated, spending every day with only Sarah for company, having the same conversations in the same rooms day after day after day. My own health fell apart from the physical and emotional strain of being a full-time caregiver with no breaks and no help. Gained 40 pounds from stress eating and never exercising, developed high blood pressure and prediabetes, started having chest pains my doctor said were from anxiety and exhaustion, stopped going to my own medical appointments because I couldn't find time or energy, ignored symptoms and problems because Sarah's needs always came first. Never complained once during those 9 years. Never told Sarah I was tired or overwhelmed or wanted my old life back. Never made her feel guilty for needing me because I believed she couldn't help being paralyzed. Told myself every single day that this was what marriage meant, that loving someone meant sacrificing everything when they needed you, that I was being a good husband by giving up my career and my health and my entire existence to care for her. Had absolutely no idea that every single sacrifice I made was based on a lie. That the woman I was destroying myself to care for was perfectly capable of walking and living normally, but chose to torture me instead. 2 years ago, I finally admitted I needed help because my body was breaking down from the constant physical strain of being Sarah's only caregiver. Couldn't lift her anymore without my back spasming so badly I'd be stuck in bed for days. Told Sarah we needed to hire a part-time nurse to come a few hours each week so I could run errands and go to doctor appointments I'd been avoiding for years. She resisted at first, said she only trusted me and didn't want strangers in our house touching her, but eventually agreed when I explained I was going to collapse if I didn't get some relief. Started interviewing home health nurses through an agency, met with 5 different candidates over 2 weeks, but Sarah rejected every single one of them for various reasons she claimed were valid. Said one was too rough when demonstrating transfers, another talked too much, another didn't seem experienced enough with paralysis patients. I was getting frustrated because we desperately needed help. But then Sarah suddenly said she'd found someone herself through an online support group for disabled people. The nurse's name was Rebecca Chen, 32 years old with proper credentials and references that checked out when I called her previous employers. She came for an interview, and Sarah lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years, said she felt instantly comfortable with Rebecca and wanted to hire her immediately. I was relieved and grateful that Sarah had finally found someone she trusted. Thought maybe having another woman around would be good for her mental health since she'd been so isolated. Rebecca started coming 3 times a week for 4-hour shifts, arriving at 10 in the morning on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays so I could leave the house and handle errands I'd been neglecting. Sarah insisted on those specific days and times, said Rebecca's schedule only allowed for those hours, and I didn't question it because I was just grateful for any help at all. Used that time to go grocery shopping, attend my own doctor appointments, get the car serviced, handle banking and bills, all the normal life tasks that had piled up over years of neglect. Noticed how happy Sarah seemed on the days Rebecca was scheduled to come, how she'd put on makeup and nice clothes instead of just wearing pajamas like she did most days. Thought it was wonderful that she was making an effort to look nice and feel good about herself, that having Rebecca's company was lifting her spirits and giving her something to look forward to. She'd tell me stories about their conversations, how Rebecca understood what it was like to work with disabled patients, how they'd bonded over shared interests in books and movies. Sarah started insisting that only Rebecca could help with certain aspects of her care, said she felt uncomfortable with me doing some of the more personal tasks anymore and would rather wait for Rebecca's shifts. I felt a little hurt, but also understood that maybe she wanted privacy and dignity with another woman instead of having her husband do everything. Backed off from some of the care tasks I'd been doing for years, let Rebecca handle the bathing and dressing on the days she was there. Never suspected anything inappropriate was happening because I trusted both of them completely. Thought I was lucky my wife had found a nurse she connected with so well. Rebecca was always professional and friendly when I was around, would give me detailed updates about Sarah's condition and any concerns she noticed. Sarah seemed happier than she'd been in years, less depressed and more engaged with life, and I attributed that to having Rebecca's companionship and support. Started leaving for longer periods on Rebecca's shifts, sometimes being gone for 5 or 6 hours instead of 4, figuring Sarah was in good hands and I might as well take advantage of the time to catch up on everything I'd been neglecting. Would come home to find them sitting together watching television or looking at magazines, Sarah in her wheelchair and Rebecca in the chair beside her, both smiling and relaxed. Never once thought to question why Sarah specifically wanted Rebecca there or why she insisted on those exact days and times. Just felt grateful that my wife finally had support beyond what I could provide, and that maybe our lives were getting a little bit easier after 9 years of struggle. Last month, I received a phone call from Dr. Harrison, who had been Sarah's primary physician for all 9 years since her accident, asking if I could come to his office alone for a private meeting without Sarah present. This was extremely unusual because in 9 years we'd always attended every single appointment together, always discussed her condition and treatment as a team with me taking notes and asking questions. My stomach dropped immediately because I thought he was going to tell me Sarah had cancer or some terminal illness on top of her paralysis. Couldn't imagine any other reason he'd want to see me privately. Drove to his office the next morning filled with dread about what terrible news he was going to deliver. Spent the whole drive thinking about how much more suffering Sarah would have to endure and whether I had the strength to care for her through another medical crisis. Sat in his waiting room for 20 minutes watching the clock and feeling my heart pound, palms sweating as I imagined all the worst possible scenarios he might tell me about. Dr. Harrison finally called me into his office, and he looked extremely uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen before. Wouldn't make eye contact with me and kept adjusting papers on his desk nervously. Started multiple sentences that he couldn't seem to finish. Would say, "I need to tell you something," and then stop and shake his head like he was struggling with how to say whatever he needed to say. The tension in that room was suffocating, and I finally told him to just tell me whatever it was because the waiting was torture. He pulled a manila folder from his desk drawer and held it for a long moment before sliding it across to me, his hand actually shaking as he let go of it. said in a quiet voice that he'd received a report from a neurologist named Dr. Patricia Walsh, who had evaluated Sarah the previous week during what I thought was a routine follow-up appointment. Told me he thought I needed to see the report myself, that he'd been debating for days whether to show it to me or how to handle the information. Then he said words that made no sense. "I'm so sorry. I should have caught this years ago." Stared at that folder sitting on his desk between us, not wanting to open it because his tone and his expression told me whatever was inside would destroy something fundamental about my reality. Asked him what the report said, and he told me I needed to read it myself, that he couldn't summarize it adequately, and I deserved to see the actual medical findings. My hands were shaking so badly when I picked up the folder that I almost dropped it, had to set it back down on the desk and take several deep breaths before I could open it. The report was 12 pages long with technical medical terminology and test results, but certain phrases jumped out at me immediately in bold text that made my vision blur. Phrases like full motor function in lower extremities, and muscle tone normal, and reflexes intact, and mobility unimpaired, and finally the conclusion that made my heart stop. No evidence of paralysis or neurological damage consistent with patient's reported condition. Patient demonstrates complete ability to ambulate independently. Read those words over and over, trying to make them mean something different than what they clearly stated, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing because it was impossible. Asked Dr. Harrison what this meant in plain English, even though I already knew, needed him to say it out loud so I could be sure I wasn't misunderstanding. He looked at me with genuine pity in his eyes and said the words that shattered 9 years of my life into pieces. "Your wife isn't paralyzed. She hasn't been paralyzed for years based on her muscle development and reflexes. She's been faking it." Sat in that office chair feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me, like gravity had stopped working, and I was falling through empty space with nothing to grab onto. 9 years of sacrifice. 9 years of caring for someone who supposedly couldn't walk. 9 years of destroying my body and my career and my entire life for a woman who could walk perfectly fine the entire time. Dr. Harrison kept talking, but I couldn't hear him anymore over the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears and the rushing noise of my world collapsing. Forced myself to read the entire neurological report word by word, even though my hands were shaking so badly the pages kept rattling. Needed to understand exactly what Dr. Walsh had discovered during her evaluation of Sarah. The report detailed extensive physical examinations, including reflex tests, muscle tone assessments, sensory response measurements, and mobility evaluations that Sarah had apparently undergone without telling me the full purpose of the appointment. Every single test result came back completely normal, showing zero evidence of spinal cord damage or nerve dysfunction or any physical reason why Sarah couldn't walk. Dr. Walsh had noted in her findings that Sarah's leg muscles showed development and tone completely inconsistent with 9 years of paralysis and wheelchair use. Explained in medical terms that muscles atrophy rapidly when not used, that true paralysis patients lose significant muscle mass within months, but Sarah's legs showed muscle development that could only come from regular weight-bearing activity and walking. The report specifically stated, patient's quadriceps, hamstrings, and calf muscles demonstrate strength and definition incompatible with claimed paralysis timeline. Read detailed descriptions of reflex tests where Sarah's legs had responded normally to stimulation. Knee-jerk reflexes present and strong. Plantar reflexes intact. All the automatic responses that wouldn't exist if her spinal cord was actually damaged the way she claimed. Dr. Walsh had tested Sarah's ability to feel sensations in her legs and feet, documented that she could feel light touch, pressure, temperature, and pain in areas she'd been claiming were completely numb for 9 years. Every single neurological indicator showed a fully functioning nervous system with zero impairment. The most damning section described mobility testing, where Dr. Walsh had asked Sarah to attempt various movements while supposedly not knowing Sarah claimed complete paralysis. Documented that Sarah could flex her ankles, move her toes, contract her thigh muscles, all movements she quickly stopped doing when she remembered she was supposed to be paralyzed. The report noted, patient demonstrates voluntary motor control, followed by immediate cessation when aware of observation, pattern highly suggestive of conscious deception rather than neurological impairment. Dr. Walsh's conclusion was devastating in its clarity, stated that based on comprehensive neurological examination, there was absolutely no medical evidence supporting Sarah's claimed paralysis. Wrote that the muscle development, reflex responses, and observed voluntary movements indicated Sarah had full use of her lower body and had likely been ambulatory for a minimum of 7 years based on muscle condition. Used phrases like inconsistent with genuine paralysis and findings suggest prolonged deception, and finally, patient is physically capable of independent ambulation. Dr. Harrison watched me read the entire report with an expression of deep guilt on his face, waited until I'd finished before explaining that he'd suspected something wasn't right for years but couldn't prove it without specialized testing. Said he'd been noticing small inconsistencies in Sarah's condition during routine exams, things like muscle tone that seemed too good or reflexes that appeared and disappeared. But he'd dismissed his concerns because he trusted his patient and didn't want to accuse someone of faking a disability without evidence. Told me he'd finally referred Sarah to Dr. Walsh for a comprehensive neurological evaluation under the pretense of documenting her condition for updated disability benefits, knowing Dr. Walsh would conduct thorough testing that would reveal the truth. Said he'd been wrestling with whether to tell me for the past week since receiving the report, knowing it would destroy my world, but also knowing I deserved to know I'd been deceived for 9 years. Apologized repeatedly for not investigating his suspicions sooner, for letting me waste years of my life caring for someone who didn't need care. Asked him how this was possible, how Sarah could have faked paralysis for 9 years through countless medical appointments and examinations without anyone catching it earlier. He explained that patients who fake paralysis can be extremely convincing, that most doctors trust their patients and don't conduct the kind of intensive neurological testing that would expose deception unless they have specific reasons to suspect fraud. Said Sarah had been smart about maintaining her deception, always showing up to appointments in her wheelchair, always giving consistent descriptions of her symptoms, always playing the role perfectly. Sat in his office for another hour trying to process what this meant, asking questions that had no good answers, trying to understand how the woman I'd sacrificed everything for could have lied to me so completely for so long about something so fundamental. Left Dr. Harrison's office in a complete daze and drove straight to a private investigation firm I'd seen advertised near the hospital. Walked in without an appointment and demanded to speak to someone immediately. A detective named Marcus Rivera saw the look on my face and brought me into his office, listened to my story about the medical report and my wife's fake paralysis without interrupting. Told him I needed proof, needed to see with my own eyes that Sarah could actually walk before I confronted her, because part of me still couldn't believe the woman I'd sacrificed 9 years for could be capable of such monstrous deception. Marcus said he could have hidden cameras installed in my house within 24 hours, tiny wireless devices that would record everything and send footage directly to a secure server I could access from my phone. Explained that what my wife was doing was likely criminal fraud given the disability benefits and insurance money involved, that I'd need video evidence if I wanted to pursue legal action. Paid him $3,000 that afternoon, and he sent a team to my house the next morning, while Sarah thought I was at a therapy appointment for my back pain. The installation team disguised themselves as cable repair workers, spent 2 hours placing cameras in the living room, kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. Devices so small they looked like electrical outlets or smoke detectors that Sarah would never notice. Marcus showed me how to access the live feeds and recordings from an app on my phone, explained that motion sensors would alert me whenever Sarah moved so I wouldn't have to watch hours of footage. Told me to act completely normal at home, to maintain my usual caregiving routine so Sarah wouldn't suspect anything had changed. Went home that afternoon and looked at Sarah sitting in her wheelchair where I'd left her, watching television like she did every day, looking helpless and dependent exactly the way she'd looked for 9 years. Felt my stomach turn with rage and disgust, knowing that the moment I left the house, she was probably going to stand up and walk around like a normal person. Made her dinner and helped her to bed and acted like everything was fine while my phone sat in my pocket, waiting to alert me to the truth. The next morning, I told Sarah I needed to go grocery shopping, kissed her forehead like I'd done 1,000 times before, and drove to a parking lot 3 blocks away, where I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. Sat in my car, watching the live feed from our living room, watching Sarah sit in her wheelchair for about 5 minutes after I'd left, watching her look around the room to make sure I was really gone. Then I watched her stand up from that wheelchair like it was nothing, watched her stretch her legs and walk normally across the living room to the kitchen. My hands started shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone, rage flooding through me so intense I thought I might pass out. Watched her open the refrigerator and pull out food she'd told me she couldn't reach. Watched her walk to the coffee maker and make herself a cup. Watched her pace around the kitchen talking on her phone with her back straight and her legs working perfectly. 9 years I'd been lifting her dead weight in and out of that wheelchair. 9 years my back had been destroying itself, carrying someone who could walk the entire time. Recorded everything on my phone screen while the cameras in the house captured it all from multiple angles. Documented her walking normally around our home for 45 minutes before she casually sat back down in her wheelchair. Watched her arrange herself in that chair like she was posing, adjusting her legs into the lifeless position she always maintained when I was home, preparing for my return so she could continue the performance she'd been giving for 9 years. Drove around for another 3 hours that day, watching the camera feeds, watching Sarah stand up and down repeatedly, watching her walk to the bathroom by herself instead of calling for me, watching her do exercises and stretches that proved her legs were strong and functional. Collected hours of footage showing beyond any doubt that my wife had been faking paralysis while I destroyed my entire life taking care of her. The footage from Wednesday morning when Rebecca was scheduled to arrive captured something even worse than Sarah's fake paralysis. Showed me a betrayal so deep it made the lying about walking seem almost insignificant by comparison. Watched from my parked car 3 blocks away as Rebecca let herself into our house at exactly 10 in the morning using the key I'd given her for emergencies. Sarah stood up from her wheelchair the moment Rebecca walked in, didn't even wait to make sure I was really gone before abandoning the paralyzed act completely. Watched through the camera feed as Sarah walked across the room to Rebecca and kissed her full on the mouth. Not a friendly greeting, but a passionate kiss between lovers who'd been waiting to be alone together. My stomach turned watching my wife wrap her arms around another woman in our living room, watching them hold each other and laugh about something I couldn't hear through the camera audio. Realized in that moment that Rebecca wasn't just a nurse I'd hired to help with Sarah's care. She was my wife's lover, and their whole relationship had been planned from the beginning. The cameras captured them moving to our bedroom, where they spent the next 3 hours together doing things I couldn't watch without wanting to vomit. Had to stop the footage multiple times because seeing my wife being intimate with someone else in the bed we'd shared for 16 years was more than I could handle. But I forced myself to keep watching because I needed evidence of everything she'd done. Needed proof that would hold up in court when I destroyed her life the way she'd destroyed mine. Turned the audio on and listened to their conversations between intimate moments. Heard them talking about me in ways that made my blood boil with rage. Sarah called me the devoted idiot while laughing with Rebecca about how easy it was to manipulate me. Said I was so stupid and trusting that she could do whatever she wanted and I'd never suspect a thing. Rebecca laughed and said it was almost too easy, that I was pathetic for believing the paralysis act for so long. Heard Sarah bragging about the disability checks she received every month that I managed for her supposed care expenses, money she was apparently spending on gifts for Rebecca and secret trips they took together when I thought Sarah was at medical appointments. They talked about the insurance settlement she'd received after the accident, $300,000 for her injuries that I'd been carefully investing and managing for her future care needs. Listened to her tell Rebecca she couldn't wait until she had access to all of it so they could finally be together properly without that fool hanging around. They mocked every aspect of my caregiving while lying in bed together, Sarah imitating how I'd lift her carefully and speak to her gently, making fun of my concern for her comfort and well-being. Rebecca did an impression of me asking if Sarah needed anything, both of them laughing hysterically at how devoted and caring I was to someone who was using me completely. Heard Sarah say she sometimes felt a little guilty, but then remembered how easy her life was with me doing everything while she got to spend her days with Rebecca. The cameras captured them planning their future together, discussing how they'd eventually get rid of me once Sarah had secured enough money from the disability fraud and insurance settlements. Talked about how Sarah would discover she could walk again through some miracle recovery, leave me for being too controlling during her disability, take half our assets in divorce, and move somewhere far away with Rebecca to start a new life. They had it all mapped out, every detail of how they'd continue using me until they'd extracted everything valuable and then discard me like trash. Recorded hours of footage over multiple Wednesday and Friday visits showing the same pattern: Sarah standing and walking the moment I left, Rebecca arriving minutes later, both of them spending hours together mocking me and planning their future while I worked myself to death caring for someone who didn't need care. Had more than enough evidence to prove Sarah had been faking paralysis and committing fraud. But now I also had proof of an affair that had been orchestrated from the moment Sarah insisted on hiring Rebecca specifically. Decided after 2 weeks of collecting video evidence that I had enough proof to destroy Sarah completely. Had documented her walking and her affair and her fraud so thoroughly that she couldn't possibly deny or explain any of it. Planned the confrontation carefully with Marcus, the investigator, advising me on exactly how to handle it. Told me to make sure the cameras were recording when I walked in so we'd have footage of her reaction and anything she said. Chose a Thursday afternoon when Rebecca wasn't scheduled to be there because I wanted Sarah alone when her entire world collapsed. Told Sarah that morning I was going to be gone most of the day running errands and visiting the bank, kissed her goodbye, and pretended everything was normal while rage burned in my chest. Drove away like always, but parked 2 blocks over and watched the camera feeds. Waited exactly 30 minutes until I saw her stand up from the wheelchair and walk to the kitchen to make lunch. Watched her moving around our house freely, with her phone pressed to her ear. Heard her telling Rebecca she missed her and couldn't wait until tomorrow when they'd be together again. Drove back to the house quietly and let myself in through the front door without making noise. Walked through the living room where her empty wheelchair sat abandoned near the television. Found Sarah standing in our bedroom by the window, fully dressed in regular clothes instead of the loose, comfortable things she usually wore, phone pressed to her ear as she laughed about something Rebecca had said. She had her back to the door and didn't hear me come in, kept talking about how she'd convinced me she needed a new medication that cost $300 a month that she was actually spending on gifts for Rebecca. Stood in the doorway watching her for a full minute before I spoke, watching her walk back and forth across the bedroom on legs that supposedly hadn't worked in 9 years. Said in the calmest voice I could manage, "When exactly were you planning to tell me you could walk?" She froze mid-sentence with her phone still at her ear, entire body going rigid as my voice registered. Watched her turn around slowly and see me standing there. Watched all the color drain from her face as she realized her 9-year performance had finally ended. She dropped her phone on the floor and immediately collapsed into the wheelchair that was sitting near the bed, some kind of automatic reflex after years of faking paralysis whenever I was around. But the gesture looked absolutely pathetic now that I knew the truth. Watching her arrange her legs into that lifeless position she'd maintained for 9 years while I stood there having just seen her walking normally. She started to say something, but no words came out, just opened and closed her mouth like a fish, while her brain tried to come up with some explanation that could possibly make sense. Asked her how long she'd been faking, and she still couldn't form words, tears starting to run down her face, but I felt zero sympathy after everything I'd discovered. Told her I knew about Rebecca, knew about the affair, knew about all the money she'd been stealing through disability fraud. Knew she'd been planning to leave me once she'd extracted everything valuable from my life. Pulled out my phone and showed her clips of the camera footage, showed her walking around our house, showed her with Rebecca in our bed, showed her laughing about what an idiot I was. Watched her face cycle through shock and fear and panic as she realized how much evidence I had, how completely trapped she was with no way to lie or manipulate her way out of this. She tried to reach for me and I stepped back. Told her not to touch me with the same hands she'd been touching her lover with in our bed. She started begging and crying, saying she was sorry and she could explain everything and it wasn't what it looked like, using the same voice she'd used for 9 years when she needed me to do something for her. Told her the only thing I wanted to hear from her was the truth about when she could walk again and when the affair started. But she just kept crying and saying she was sorry over and over. Called Marcus right there in front of her and told him to contact the police and insurance investigators. Told Sarah her fake tears weren't going to save her from what was coming. Within 24 hours of confronting Sarah, I had turned over everything to the police fraud division and to investigators from both her disability insurance company and the government benefits office she'd been defrauding for 9 years. Gave them copies of all the video footage showing her walking normally. Gave them the medical report from Dr. Walsh proving she had no neurological damage. Gave them financial records showing every disability payment and insurance claim she'd collected. The investigators told me this was one of the most clear-cut fraud cases they'd ever seen because I'd documented everything so thoroughly that Sarah couldn't possibly claim any misunderstanding or confusion. The police arrested Sarah 3 days later at our house, came with a warrant and handcuffs while she sat in that wheelchair still trying to maintain the Paralysis Act, even though everyone knew the truth. Watched her try to tell the officers she couldn't walk and needed her wheelchair. Watched them tell her to stand up or they'd carry her to the patrol car. She finally stood on her own legs and walked to their car, the first time I'd seen her walk in person after 9 years of lies, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction watching her performance finally end. Sarah was charged with multiple felonies, including insurance fraud for the $340,000 she'd collected in disability benefits over 9 years, theft of government benefits for the monthly disability checks totaling another $87,000, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Each charge carried potential prison time of 5 to 10 years, prosecutors telling me they were going to push for maximum sentences because the duration and calculated nature of her deception made it especially serious. They called it one of the most egregious cases of disability fraud they'd prosecuted because she'd maintained the deception for so long and stolen so much money. The insurance investigators discovered Sarah had been forging medical documents for years to support her disability claims, had been faking symptoms during independent medical examinations, had convinced multiple doctors her paralysis was real through careful manipulation and performance, found emails where she'd researched how paralysis patients behaved so she could mimic their symptoms more convincingly, found internet searches for how to fake paralysis long-term, and can doctors detect fake paralysis in her browsing history. Every piece of evidence showed deliberate, calculated fraud that she'd been planning and executing for almost a decade. Rebecca was arrested 2 weeks later and charged as an accomplice to Sarah's fraud schemes, lost her nursing license immediately when the state board learned she'd been helping a patient fake disability for personal and financial gain. Prosecutors charged her with conspiracy and fraud, proving through phone records and financial transactions that she'd known about Sarah's fake paralysis from the beginning and had actively helped maintain the deception. The nursing board banned her from ever working in healthcare again, putting a permanent mark on her record that would prevent her from any medical employment. Investigators found evidence that Rebecca had been helping Sarah manipulate medical appointments and forge documentation, had been coaching her on how to behave during examinations to maintain the paralysis illusion. Discovered that their affair had started within months of Rebecca being hired, that the whole finding a nurse through a support group story had been planned so Sarah could bring her lover into our house under the pretense of medical care. They'd been using my money to fund their relationship while making me do all of Sarah's care on the days Rebecca wasn't there, splitting the disability fraud money between them for vacations and gifts. The financial investigators calculated that Sarah had stolen a total of $427,000 through various disability benefits, insurance claims, and government assistance over the 9 years of her fake paralysis. Told me that every dollar would need to be repaid as part of any plea deal or sentence, that she'd likely spend years in prison and then spend the rest of her life paying back the money she'd stolen. The district attorney called me personally to say they were treating this as a priority case because disability fraud hurt everyone who legitimately needed assistance, said they wanted to make an example of Sarah and Rebecca to deter others from similar schemes. Sat in the prosecutor's office signing papers and giving statements, feeling a grim satisfaction that the woman who'd stolen 9 years of my life was finally facing real consequences that would destroy her as completely as she'd tried to destroy me. Sarah pleaded guilty to all charges 6 months later after her lawyers told her the video evidence was too overwhelming to fight in trial, accepted a plea deal that sentenced her to 6 years in federal prison for the fraud charges. Watched her stand in court wearing an orange jumpsuit, looking nothing like the helpless disabled woman she'd pretended to be for 9 years. Listened to the judge tell her she'd committed one of the most cruel and calculated frauds he'd ever seen. The judge said she hadn't just stolen money from insurance companies and the government. She'd stolen 9 years of my life and destroyed my health and career through deliberate deception that showed a complete lack of human empathy. Sarah was ordered to repay every single dollar she'd stolen, $427,000 plus interest and penalties that brought the total to over $600,000. The court seized what remained of her insurance settlement and our joint savings, garnished any future earnings she'd make for the rest of her life until the debt was paid. She'll be 70 years old before she's out of prison and finished repaying what she stole. Will spend decades living with the consequences of choosing to torture someone who loved her instead of just being honest. Rebecca got 3 years in prison for her role as an accomplice and lost her nursing license permanently, will never work in healthcare again, and will carry a felony conviction for the rest of her life. The nursing board's ruling stated that she'd betrayed the most fundamental ethics of her profession by using her position to help a patient commit fraud and by engaging in an inappropriate relationship while being paid to provide care. Her entire career that she'd spent years building was destroyed because she chose to participate in Sarah's sick game. I'm 58 years old now and finally free from the prison that was disguised as a marriage and devotion, living alone in our house that feels bigger and quieter without Sarah's constant demands. My back still hurts every day from 9 years of lifting someone who didn't need to be lifted, probably will hurt for the rest of my life as a permanent reminder of her betrayal. Started going to physical therapy and taking medication that's slowly helping, began working out and losing the weight I'd gained from years of stress and exhaustion. Dr. Harrison told me he'd suspected something was wrong for at least 3 years before he finally ordered the neurological evaluation, said he feels guilty for not investigating sooner, but that he'd been trained to trust his patients. He apologized again when I saw him for my own medical checkup, said watching what I'd gone through made him completely change how he evaluates disability claims now. The medical community in our city knows Sarah's story and uses it as a case study in how patients can manipulate the healthcare system when doctors are too trusting. Started looking for work again after 9 years away from my career, finding that my age and the gap in my employment history make it difficult but not impossible. Some interviewers are sympathetic when I explain why I left my executive position. Others seem skeptical, like they think I'm lying about being a caregiver. Don't care what they think because I know the truth and I know I did what I thought was right based on the information I had. Can't blame myself for believing my wife when she said she was paralyzed. Sarah sends letters from prison every few weeks begging me to visit her or to forgive her or to help her appeal her sentence. But I return every one unopened because there's nothing she could say that would make me want to see her face again. She claims in the letters other prisoners have told me about that she was depressed after the accident and the fake paralysis started as a cry for attention that spiraled out of control. Don't believe her excuses because the evidence showed she planned everything carefully, researched how to fake it convincingly, brought her lover into our home, and mocked me behind my back for years. Sit on my porch sometimes in the evening drinking coffee and thinking about how I wasted 9 years of my life on someone who saw my love and devotion as weaknesses to exploit. But I also think about how I'm free now while she's the one who really can't walk away, locked in a cell where she belongs, finally confined the way she pretended to be while destroying someone who would have done anything for her.